Good morning. This is State Representative Robert Martwick, and it's Saturday, I'm losing track. I think it's the April 6th. And I'm here in my office in Chicago. It is the weekend, so I'm home from Springfield for the weekend, but I wanted to give you an update on some legislation that passed this last week. So last week and this week we've passed a lot of bills. We're approaching the bill passage deadline to get bills passed out of the House and moved over to the Senate. And one that passed last week is, if any of you know me, it's a bill that I've been working on for about 4.5, 5 years now. And it's the bill that would provide an elected representative school board for the Chicago Public Schools. And that word is read for a reason. Elected representative school board. It's something that has been an initiative of parent groups and education advocacy groups here in the city of Chicago for the last 10 years. And as I mentioned, for the last 4.5, 5 years, I've been working on this issue extensively. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of an update on this because it passed the House in overwhelming numbers last week. It passed 110 to 2. 110 people thought that this bill was a good idea. 2 people thought it was a bad idea, and that says a lot about where we're going in this movement. It'll now go to the Senate, and the process will begin in the Senate, and we'll go through the same machinations, see if there are amendments or changes that need to be made to the bill, and then hopefully get a vote there and get it to the governor's desk. And I'm feeling more confident that it's going to get done this year than ever before because we're just at that point. We have a governor who has said he supports an elected representative school board for Chicago. We have a mayor-elect who supports some form of elected school board for the city of Chicago. And so I think we're on a path to getting it done. And so I really wanted to dive back into the issue a little bit deeper for those of you who don't understand it. And so I want to start a little bit with the history of the city of Chicago and the Chicago Public Schools. So in 1995, there was a big change. It was the School Reform Act. It was enacted by the legislature, then an entirely Republican legislature and a Republican governor, gave a form of government to the Chicago Public Schools that did not exist anywhere in the country. Full authoritarian control of the Chicago Public Schools to the mayor of the city of Chicago. Now, I know what you're saying. Appointed government does exist, and it does. We have more forms of appointed government than we do elected government. But appointed government usually is done in a way that has checks and balances. So, for instance, the Illinois State Board of Education, which at one point was an elected body, is now an appointed body. And the governor appoints the members of the Illinois State Board of Education. But his appointments are subject to confirmation by the Senate and oversight by the General Assembly. And most importantly, the state of Illinois owns the finances of the Illinois State Board of Education. In 1995, what was created with the Chicago Public Schools was a situation where the mayor appointed the members of the Chicago Public Schools. But no aldermanic confirmation was necessary. The mayor got to choose who he wanted. They served as long as he wanted to, and they were not subject to any oversight by the Chicago City Council. That just doesn't exist anywhere. To give one government full authoritarian control over a separate government, and I know what you're saying, separate government, it actually is. The law says that CPS has its own taxing and spending authority. And here's the kicker. The city of Chicago has never owned those finances. It's always treated financially as though it's a completely different government, and yet, in terms of governance, the mayor of the city of Chicago runs the whole show. It doesn't make sense, it's not right, and it really is time for a change. So what happened in 1995? So the legislature gave this control to the mayor of the city of Chicago, and they also gave him wide-ranging control over the finances of the city of Chicago, or the Chicago Public Schools. I'll explain that in a second. And they took away a lot of the collective bargaining rights of the employees of the Chicago Public Schools. They took away things like the ability of the teachers to collectively bargain over class sizes. Chicago now has 34 kids per classroom, one of the largest class sizes anywhere in the country. Going back to that finance thing, prior to 1995, the Chicago Public Schools was mandated and had no control over making the required pension payment every year into the pension fund. With 1995 legislation, that went away, and the pension payments became discretionary. The board could decide to pay as much as they want to, and so they did decide to pay as much as they want to, or not pay at all. This is one of the biggest failures of the elected school board. In 1995, when it came in, the first thing that they did was they made no pension payment. Zero. No pension payment. A pension holiday. Worst thing you could possibly do. But doing it one year wasn't enough. They did it the next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that. In fact, they skipped an entire decade of pension payments. Not one penny going towards the Chicago Teacher Pension Fund. That pension fund was 104% funded, and it has now slipped to 50% funded. And it's created a massive debt. That debt has to be paid back. How does it get paid back? It gets paid back out of the money that we pay as taxpayers. So our taxes have gone up, and yet more money goes to the payment of the debt, and less money gets to the classroom to teach the children where it's supposed to be done. That was not a situation that was created by the teachers. That was a situation that was created by this appointed board that skipped a decade of pension payments. What else happened? Well, if you've read the news lately, you've heard about the way CPS basically ignored sexual harassment and sexual assault by teachers against students. That's the latest scandal. A scandal that just preceded that by a couple of years under the Forrest Claypool administration of the Chicago Public Schools was the fact that a large portion of minority students were denied critical special education services. And how about the scandal under former CEO Barbara Byrd Bennett? She comes appointed to the Chicago Public Schools with great fanfare, and the first thing that she proposes is a $25 million contract to her former employer. A $25 million contract to the former employer. Did the Chicago Public School appointed board put that out for a bid process? No. They granted a $25 million no-bid contract to the former employee of their new CEO. But here's the kicker. Not only did they grant that contract, they did it without any discussion at the meeting in which the contract was awarded, and without any dissent. Not even one no vote. That's crazy. That's not the way democracy is supposed to work. And when it fails, we, the taxpayers, the citizens, the residents of the city of Chicago, are supposed to have some form of accountability. But it didn't exist because we can't exercise that accountability through the course of elections. And so, about a decade ago, a group of people started advocating for this elected representative school board. 5 years ago, I got into this process. And as I sat down with these people, we had thoughtful discussions about how do we address creating an elected school board and making sure it functions as well as possible, right? It's democracy. We all know. We live here. We elected Donald Trump. We elected Bruce Rauner. It doesn't always work perfectly, but what sort of safeguards can we put in? So the first thing we did was we sat down and said, what are the biggest concerns about changing over to an elected form of government? And number one, far and away, was the concern about what will be the role that outside money will play over the influence of these elections, right? Special interest money coming in, one side or the other of the education debate, be it the unions or be it the charter schools or be it corporate interests, coming in and using too much money to influence the course of these elections and buying influence over that board, something we really wanted to guard against. Number two, we wanted an elected representative school board. How do we ensure that every segment of the diverse and rich fabric that is the city of Chicago has representation on that board? That's the whole point of democracy, right? That your community has a voice in the decision-making process. And in Chicago, we have very diverse neighborhoods. Here I live in Portage Park. Just to the east of me is a community called Lincoln Park. Very, very different community. And to the south of me is a community called Morgan Park. Very, very different community. Different community, different concerns, and a different approach, different needs in terms of the education system. We want to make sure that all of these communities have representation. Finally, and I think that this is not, to be taken lightly, how are we going to ensure that the voters that come out to vote are making good decisions, right? I mean, you can't ensure it, but how do we provide the best opportunity for them to be educated about the issues that they're going to go and vote in, so that when they vote for their representatives, they're making good choices, right? So these were the three big concerns. And so I came up with a structure, and the structure was designed to address these three concerns. So here's the structure, and this is the bill that passed that's over in the Senate. Because we wanted representation, we broke the city up into 20 elective districts. So the school board members will run in individual districts that are subsets of the city, much like we have 50 aldermen, right? 50 different wards, 50 different communities. This would be 20, okay? We'll get to that number in a minute and why. We created a citywide election for the school board president. This is different than most school boards in the state of Illinois, where they're elected at large, not from districts. Although there are a couple school districts that do have sub-districts, but usually the school board is constituted and they select a president. This would provide for an elected citywide school board president. Finally, we put in some very strict conflict of interest provisions to try and limit conflicts of interest. And finally, we did a structure where there was no pay or benefits, so no pensions or health care, for members that serve on this board, okay? So why did we come up with this structure? Well, let's go back to the concerns. Number one, money. How do you limit the influence of money? Well, districts. The bigger the district, the more important the money. Think about Congress. Nobody runs for Congress without spending at least $1 million. The smaller the district, the less important and the less expensive it is to run those races. And so you think about Congress, which has 750,000 people, versus a ward, which has about 50,000 people, right? And they're very different. If you're running for Congress, you may go out and knock on doors, but you're not going to get elected by knocking on doors. You're going to get elected by running television ads and sending out tons of mailers, okay? But if you're running for alderman in a much smaller district, then you can win a race. And we just saw in this last election, people who beat candidates who were way more better funded than they were because they went out and they knocked on doors and they talked to their neighbors. So the smaller district allows for, or it makes the ability to grassroots organize, to knock on doors, to talk to your neighbors, perhaps your involvement in your community, either through neighborhood groups or LSCs or PTA organizations, that will be more important than the money. So, number one, how do we address limiting the influence of outside money? Smaller districts, okay? 20 representative districts in the city of Chicago will look like about a state representative district, be equal in size to a state representative district. Not bad. Representation, how do you ensure that there is the rich fabric of the city of Chicago is fully represented on the school board? Again, the representative districts, right? Again, if you have less people serving on the board, you have bigger districts. You have more people serving on the board, you have smaller districts. The smaller the districts, the more likely it is that everyone in each neighborhood will be able to identify with their school board representative, and that school board representative will be able to understand the unique concerns that the schools in their district are facing, right? So this is the number, 20. Now, how did we come up with that number? It really wasn't scientific, okay? There was some feel there, right? And so, again, when I first thought of this, I thought, well, why not let's do 50? How about we do 50? Because then it would be one per ward, and I got pushback on that. They said, we think that's too many. So we shortened it down to 50. I've heard people say 15. What can I tell you about other school districts that do this? So think about this. The standard in Illinois is 7. There are communities with 5,000 people that have 7 representatives. The city of Chicago has 3 million people. Is 20 really all that many? If what your goal is representation, then the more representatives you have, the more likely it is that you're getting that fair representation. By contrast, the city of Los Angeles has 7 school board members that run citywide. They spend millions of dollars on their elections. They have little minority representation, and special interest money plays an enormous influence on those elections. Not what we're looking for here. So let's get down to voter education. Here's where we get into the one president citywide, right? And there's a reason for that. The Chicago media market, there's not a lot of attention paid to local representatives. You're not going to see a ton of news information about the things that I do or the things that your local alderman does. Occasionally we're in the news, not always for the good reasons, but occasionally we're in the news. But you know about the issues that are going on in the state because there's so much media coverage of the governor. He is the executive. He gets all the media attention. And so when you go to vote for your state representative, you've been educated about the issues through the governor's race, and you can judge me or any other representative candidate based on how we align with those issues. Same thing with the city council. Individual aldermen never get that much press, a little bit of press, sometimes in a local newspaper, but really where the information comes from is that the media drives so much information about the performance of the mayor's office that we're aware of the issues that the city faces, and we can judge our aldermanic candidates when we vote based on the information that we've gotten from the mayor's race. And hence, a citywide school board president. When we have a citywide elected school board president, there will be an enormous amount of media attention on this race, and that will help inform the voters as to whatever the current issues are in CPS at that time. And so that was the motivation behind this. Let me give you a contrast to that, right? So you think about another form of government that's as big as the county of Cook, right? The Cook County Water Reclamation District. Well, we elect these commissioners at large, and instead of electing the president of the Water Reclamation District, that person is selected from the board members. And since there is no big election on for that race, the voters really, by and large, are less informed, not completely uninformed, but it creates challenges for information. So I think this is a good structure because it allows for both representation. It allows to make sure that there's minority access to the school board. It limits the influence of money by having these representative districts, and it provides good information through the voters by creating this one citywide election position, which will get quite a bit of attention. The conflicts of interest and no pay, no benefits, these were done to satisfy concerns of people when the bill was first drafted, making sure that employees of the district could not run, nor people who had contracts with the district could run for that office within a year. And the no pay, no benefits was based on the fact that, and I'm not really in agreement with this, I think people should be compensated for their time and efforts, but there was a big pushback because school board members are not paid in Illinois, and they didn't want an exception for Chicago. So that's where this structure came from. So this is the bill that we passed 110 to 2. Everyone in the Illinois General Assembly, Republicans and Democrats, City of Chicago officials, suburban officials, downstate officials, agreed that this was a good idea. Okay. However, since it's been passed, there have been some new concerns that have come up. And that's a good thing, right? We should always be looking at what we're doing and trying to figure out how to make it better. So let's talk about those new concerns. So one has been strictly about this size. In fact, I've heard that some people have said that 20 would be too many. It would be unwieldy, right? And so, and I think that that's a good thing to talk about, right? We do want this school board, after all, to function and perform. And if people think that 20 is too many, I'm willing to hear that and willing to address that concern. But let me give the counterpoint on that, right? So again, let's think about other government bodies that we have. The city of Chicago has 50 aldermen, and they get things done, right? The Illinois State Senate has 59 senators, and they pass quite a bit of legislation. In the House of Representatives, we have 118 representatives, and we pass a lot of legislation. And in our federal Congress, we have 535 members of Congress, 100 senators, 435 members of the House, and we pass legislation. I'm not sure about unwieldy, and I get the concern, but my point is this. If you're worried about money and representation, there is a straight trade-off. Do you want fewer districts so that you think that there will be less problems arriving at a decision? Perhaps, but when you have fewer districts, they're bigger, they're more influenced by money, they have less representation, and maybe with the influence of more money and less representation, they arrive at decisions easier, but maybe they're not the right decisions. So this is a balancing act, right? What is your concern? Is your concern the size, or is your concern the money or representation? Because it's a straight trade-off. You want less, money will be more of an influence. You want more, you'll get better representation. Maybe the meetings will last a little bit longer. They'll have to work a little bit harder to get to a decision. I think it's a trade-off worth making. I think 20 is a good number, but I'm open to hearing other suggestions and concerns. And like I said, if you can come up with less members and still address these concerns, I'm open to that. Number 5 on this number 2 on the new concerns, but 5 on the overall concerns, is concerns about experience. So I've heard suggestions that we should have minimum qualifications for people to serve on the school board. There's been a suggestion that they should come from LSCs. So in other words, we wouldn't actually have an elected representative school board. We would have a selected representative school board, meaning that the school board would be selected from people currently serving on LSCs. So I disagree with this. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think there's anything wrong with experience. Don't get me wrong. I think that's a good idea. But I think experience should be an issue left to the voters. I think they should decide. And this comes back to what we believe our democracy is or isn't, right? So our democracy was founded on a value that every citizen of this country should have access to serve in their government, which is why there are no minimum qualifications or experience levels that have to be met in order to serve as an alderman, in order to serve as a county commissioner, in order to serve as a state senator or a state representative or a governor. None. There's no box you have to check. And in fact, if we get into our federal government, there's no minimum qualifications for the House of Representatives, the United States Senate, and even the President of the United States, other than age. We put an age restriction on there. For the President of the United States, you have to be 35 years old and a natural-born citizen. But there's no minimum experience, right? And I think this is important. Remember, the school board is not just about parents and students. That's what we think about. But schools affect everyone. They affect every citizen in a community, and they affect every taxpayer in a community. The performance of those schools relate to our property values. They relate to the vibrancy of our economy. They directly relate to public safety, and all of us have an interest in that. And so if you look at school boards throughout this state, because there are school boards throughout the state that are elected, there are, without a doubt, a large number of parents with students who are elected to these school boards. But there's also young people who don't have kids. There are senior citizens, because they are equally affected by the performance of the schools as everyone else. I believe everyone should have access. I believe the question of who is best situated to serve a group of constituencies is who the voters choose through the course of an election. So I'm not a real big fan of this experience thing. I think it's a good thing, but I think it should be left to the voters to decide. Finally, the last thing that's come up lately is this idea that has been proffered by soon-to-be former Mayor Emanuel, and it seems to continue today in a certain segment. People are saying the mayor should have skin in the game. The mayor should have skin in the game, so the mayor should retain some control. Well, I go back to that history about what it's been like with the mayor having control over this. And the idea that somehow or another that the mayor should have skin in the game, my point is this. Elected school boards like this, fully elected school boards, exist in every corner of this state except the city of Chicago. And they function well. And they're in communities where there are mayors. And the mayors, even though they don't retain influence over the board, continue to have skin in the game. Why? Because they're mayor of a community in which a school is situated. And of course that school has, as I said, has a great deal of effect on the property values, the public safety. So of course mayors are going to have skin in the game, just like every other elected official in there. I have no influence over the Chicago public schools, but as a representative in Springfield, you better believe I fight for fair funding, I fight for increased funding, I fight for resources to come to the Chicago public schools, even though I have no skin in the game. The skin in the game that I have is those school districts affect me and my constituents, my family, my friends, my neighbors. And that's the same situation that will exist even if we have a fully elected school board. So the idea of giving the mayor some continued control over the school board, not really something I believe is the right path. That being said, if there's anything I know, and if there's anything I've done throughout the course of my career in the legislature, is I'm always open to compromise. And so I imagine these new concerns, as well as the original concerns, will be vetted again once the bill starts to move through the Senate. I look forward to being a participant in those discussions. I look forward to meeting with the people that have these concerns and addressing them. And I look forward, I think, this year to seeing the governor sign a bill, finally, that will create an elected representative school board for the Chicago Public Schools. So that's it on the elected representative school board. It's passed the House 110 to 2. 110 people think it's a good idea. 2 people, I have no idea, but that's okay. On to the Senate and on to the negotiations, and I will keep you informed as this goes on. There's other things going on in Springfield. Just a plug, if you're watching this, Monday night at 7 p.m. at the Copernicus Center, 5216 West Lawrence, we're having a town hall on the governor's fair tax proposal, which I'm very, very involved in that. As many of you know, I'm a big proponent of a fair tax. We're having a town hall. We're going to discuss the specifics about it. So I encourage you all to come and join us at the Copernicus Center Monday night, this Monday, 2 days from now. And it'll be at 7 o'clock, 5216 West Lawrence Avenue, Copernicus Center, right in Jefferson Park. You can take the Blue Line. It's a half a block walk from the Blue Line, Jefferson Park Terminal. Come join us and talk about the fair tax. Next week, I also hope to be presenting a bill that will update the Student Data Privacy Act, giving parents more control over the data that's collected from their children in the school systems, more protections to that data. So there's a lot going on in Springfield, a lot of interesting bills. Looking forward to having more discussions with you. And as always, I thank you for watching. Please make any comments, questions, concerns, put them here. I'll do my best to get back to you. Thanks for watching. See you next time.